Welcome back to the Lion's Garden podcast. I'm your host, Annie Peguero. I'm a leadership coach who works with small business owners who are ready to expand their business and their income, but may feel held back by personal challenges such as trauma or fear. I like to call myself a fear alchemist. My clients understand that their personal life and business are deeply connected, and they're looking for support that addresses both. I also work with universities, organizations, government and military groups, and also work-at-home moms that want to enhance their leadership development, improve resilience, and foster a healthier environment through neuroscience-based strategies. You're going to love this episode. It's episode 92. I'm talking with Rebecca Babayan, who was my former client who has turned into a dear friend. Rebecca has more than 25 years of corporate leadership and organizational experience. You are going to absolutely love the way that she shares about her professional experience and weaves it into her personal life and adventures. Her areas of expertise across the talent management spectrum include the design and development of organizational effectiveness, interventions, strategic leadership, coaching, change management, and leadership development. Listen, Rebecca is brilliant. She's an author, she's a speaker, a facilitator, an Emergenetics Master Facilitator, Master Trainer, which only 33 people in the world have. You're going to love our conversation because the thing about Rebecca is she is so humble, she is so real, and she seamlessly blends her love for travel, and wait till you hear these stories that she's about to share, her love for travel in with her parenting. She's a mom of 2 girls. She's a wife. And I love the way that she views her life in holism. It's such a big part of what we talk about here on the Lion's Garden podcast, that business, work, and motherhood does not live in a bubble. It is all connected. It is all intertwined. And in this episode with Rebecca, you're going to gain some valuable tips on how you can blend it all together, even on those super challenging days. Here we go. This is amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Annie. Always happy to be with you.
So as I shared in the intro here, Rebecca is my former client who has become a dear friend. And when I asked Rebecca to share with me here in like this recorded setting and be on my podcast, you were like, yes, let's do it. Yes, let's do it. That was like months ago. So, the world has like opened up for us and here we are, stars aligned, and I'm thrilled and honored. This is episode 92. So we're almost approaching the 100th episode. So I'm really honored that you're spending time here with me today and for my listeners.
Well, thank you. And congratulations for this upcoming milestone. That is huge. I'm very happy for you.
I was hoping it was 100, that it would be you and I here for the 100th episode. I'm like, wouldn't that be cool? So I haven't recorded in a while. This is kind of like a comeback, right? So I go in like seasons. So it's wonderful to share this with you today. I haven't recorded since February. So thanks for being here.
Oh, wow. Well, very good. We're heading into autumn, time for a shift and change. So here we are.
Exactly. We have so much to talk about.
I know.
And I'd love to start with your professional background is so diverse. Like as I shared in the intro, you worked for airlines, you were a health coach, you're an author, facilitator, coach, speaker, and wanderlust junkie. I added the word junkie because Rebecca is always coming back from some type of travel. So just so you know, listeners, like she's always on an amazing adventure. Mm-hmm. And I love the way you weave your travels and adventures, not only into your leadership and your work, but into your personal life. So can you start with sharing about your travels and your love for just being out in the world and adventuring?
Thank you. It's one of those topics that it brings me so much joy and excitement to talk about. And I really attribute it back to my parents. So I grew up in a really small town in Ohio. We were about an hour and a half, probably southwest or northwest of Cleveland, up by Lake Erie. And in our house, my parents had a map of the world on our dining room wall. And after dinner, my mom would usually go back to the map and she would find a place, whether it was a city, a river, a mountain range, a country. And my brother and I, usually myself though, we would have to stand there until we found it. So some could have seen it as punishment that you have to stand there until you found this place. But for me, it was like the aperture of the world just opened up. That instead of just this small town in Ohio that I grew up in, there was this whole place out there that was just waiting to be explored. And I think at a very, very early age, that's what instilled in me this desire to see, to learn, to grow, to seek to understand. But interestingly enough, it wasn't until I was 17 that I took my very first plane ride and got a taste of going someplace much further away. But we had great vacations when I was growing up. We had a motor home and we would pack that up and travel to Maine or travel to Florida. You would see the Kennedy Space Center or tour the LL Bean factory in Kennebunkport up in that area. And then, I got into education in college. I originally started off in political science, but ended up shifting and changing. And of course, my minor or my specialization was in geography. And just, again, so much to see and learn about people and places and just understanding different customs and cultures. And one of my very favorite classes in college was all about Nigeria and just understanding the country. And that was its own class, Nigeria. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this would be so cool. And just, again, the depth of understanding of different people and cultures and how we show up, it just continued to drive this spark of curiosity. And still hadn't traveled a lot, when I was in college. But after I graduated, I did a stint in teaching. Didn't last very long, only lasted about 6 months. I was teaching in inner city Pittsburgh at a magnet school up on Mount Washington. Didn't last a long time because it was different than what I thought I was getting into. We had metal detectors, we had gang fights in our classrooms. It wasn't the 1990s Dead Poets Society that I thought I was getting into, and made a really quick pivot. And where did I go to? I went back and got a degree in travel and tourism. And that is what brought me down here to Northern Virginia, and have been here since 95. And of all things, got into aviation because I could then start exploring more. And that's kind of that whole journey. And once I got into aviation, the bug never left, even though I haven't been in it for almost 20 years. My husband's still in aviation. My oldest daughter is now working on getting her private pilot's license. But it's just that ability to be able to go, to experience, to see, because for me, every one of those experiences not only leaves a mark, but it changes me somehow. It's been a fabulous journey, whether it's been in my career, whether it's been in my travels, how everything just seems to neatly fit together somehow. And that's where I am today.
So beautiful. You use two words specifically that I'd love to dig into a little bit more. You talked about perspective, or I said perspective, but you talked about curiosity and talked about how kind of immersing yourself in these other cultures will give perspective. Talk with me about that a little bit, and how you've been able to bring your love of travel into not only your business, but your personal life, your mothering. You have two daughters, your marriage, right? Like because one thing that, that you and I both feel is so very important is the concept of holism, right? Like our work can't live outside of our life, which can't live outside of our parenting because whole, we're whole humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does travel and seeing the world and recognizing that it's expansive,
Mm-hmm.
and it giving you this perspective that we are just in this one tiny little spot,
Yeah.
right? How does that relate?
Yeah. For me, it's kind of everything for me because I just fully believe that for us to be the best human, the best leader, the best parents, the best person we can in this world, there's so much out there that we don't know. And we can either hear or listen, to others and make a choice and make a decision, or we can go experience it ourselves. And to me, the power of having these experiences has allowed me to shape my own perspective, has allowed me to shape my own belief. And I've then been able to transpose that into not only how I parent, but how I show up in my marriage, how I show up at work. And I think what it has allowed me to do is, I know in the past, and I still am to some extent, I make very quick decisions.
Mm,
But what travel has allowed me to do, it's allowed me to slow down enough to say, what am I missing? What don't I understand? What could I learn
mm,
from this? And it's one of those things that I try to instill and talk to my children about too, my daughters, because I want them to have these same types of experiences, to see the world through their eyes, to let that shape them. There's only so much that I can do as a parent. I can, share what I believe and how I would do things, but they have to get out there and see and experience and make those decisions themselves, formulate their own beliefs to be able to show up to be the best humans that they can. And it's the same thing with work. One of my core values with my personal business is curiosity. And in order for us to be curious, we need to see things differently. And that's just simply a choice that I make, is to be able to infuse what I've learned through travel into my personal life and also into my business. Because one of the things that's so important for me is there's only so much that I can teach my children. I can share my beliefs, my values. I can tell them things, but I just firmly believe until they experience it themselves, that's when they get to truly make their own choice and their decision on how they want to show up, how they want to lead, how they want to be a better person, how they want to engage with society around them. And it's one of those opportunities that with travel, it has been able to influence, the work that I do. It allows me to tell stories of perspective and curiosity. It allows me to tie into my personal value of curiosity. But the two, travel, perspective, curiosity, the work that I do, being a parent, being a spouse, for me, they tie so intrinsically together. I can't imagine them being separate.
I love that. And I love the way that you weave your entire life, all the bubbles together, in such a beautiful way. And I'll tell you what, this parenting thing is it's the real deal, isn't it? Your girls are much older than mine. And the challenges are different, right? The everyday,
Yeah.
the day to day, and what would you say to a mom who might not be able to travel right now? Like she
Mhm.
wants to, right? She wants to, but she's like, it's just not in the cards, right? For
Yeah.
whatever reason. How can she harness this, the lessons and this bliss really of
Mhm.
seeing the world at home?
Yeah, I think there's two big things that come to mind, Annie. When I was a kid too, I basically grew up in a library. I lived on West Main Street, and right, a couple blocks away was our public library. And to me, that is a beautiful place to be because everything
But
that we cannot physically touch or see in the world, we can find in a library. Travel books, travel biographies. Those are incredible places to start because it gives another perspective. It gives a parent the ability to be able to sit down and enjoy story time with their children. It gives them a way to, especially if they have older children, to say, here's a book. Take a look through this, take a leaf through this. Let's talk about it. Listen to a podcast on travel. I think there's so many ways that you can still experience it, but what you're doing is you're seeking out different opinions. You're seeking out different ways of seeing the world instead of just letting it being fed to you. But
yeah,
again, you're there, you're expanding your perspective, you're opening your aperture, and you're taking the books, the podcasts. I mean, here in Northern Virginia, too, look at the history that we have here. Go explore a battlefield, go to the river, go to the shore, go to DC and explore the museums. There's so much that we have right here in our own backyard that even if we don't have the ability to physically get out and fly someplace new, we've got so many resources that are here for us to be able to give that picture, to give those options to our children.
I love that. And I even got a little teary when you first started talking about the library, because I was thinking back to like when my girls were much smaller and going to the library was hard, right? You had to get all the books and bring the bag and everything. And I think that adding that, the intention of, I'm not getting on a plane right now, like it's not happening for us in this moment, but I can go to local places
Mhm.
like the library, like like different parks, and do this for my children instead of thinking of it as just another thing to do to get them to take a nap, right? Or
Right.
now it's like we're busy, like there's soccer, we've got sports, like your girls are in sports, we're in sports, and it's like I just don't want to add another thing sometimes. So I
Right.
love that you talked about how bringing in the purpose and intention and what that can do for your family as a whole, which, really when you're in it, sometimes you don't really think about that. You're just like, let me
Yeah.
just get through this
It, it's
day, right?
it's so true because there's so many times where it's just that I just need to get through today. I just
Mhm.
want to get through tomorrow. You just reminded me something kind of where I started off this whole story, which is another great place for parents is buy a map. Buy a
Mm.
map, put it on your wall and sit down
Mhm.
there. Every day pick a spot, a city, a river that you want to explore with your child and Google it. And just find something
Mm.
interesting that
Mhm.
you can immerse yourself in. And that was really what got me to kind of a life-changing trip a little over a year ago, is because there was this one place that I wanted nothing more than to see and say I was there and to be able to experience it for myself.
I'm so
And
happy you brought this up. This is definitely on my list. And I really want to get into that trip because it is something that some people kind of wish they could go, but you
yeah.
made it happen. Tell us about
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, so I love the world. I love travel. I love people. And I've had this one place. I mean, I have a bucket list that's probably this big of places I want to go and see. But there was this one place that I couldn't imagine getting to the end of my life and saying I didn't get a chance to go there. And it was Everest Base Camp. And I got this, I'm going to call it maybe a midlife transformation about a year and a half, 2 years ago. I had just recently turned 50. And I knew too that I needed to do something for myself. I needed to just go explore because up until this point, it's always been my family and I traveling, going places, enjoying each other. But I knew deep down I needed something for myself. And so I reached out to a friend of mine who was a travel agent and said, "This is where I want to go." And she's like, I've never planned a trip like that before.
Amazing.
So she did some research, I did some research, and we both came back with the exact same tour company that had kind of risen to the top of the list. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, it's meant to be. It's absolutely meant to be. And so her and I just navigated, just the registration process, which was super simple. But everything about this company that I used, what I noticed too is it also had a lot of my values. It,
Mm.
valued being curious about the world. It valued kindness. It valued dependability. And these are all things that matter to me as well. And so I just signed up and did it. And the other thing I loved about this tour company was they specialize in very small tours, so 1 to 8 people, and got registered. And I picked my tour date. And lo and behold, I was the only person on the excursion, which was, I think, the absolute best thing that could have ever happened to me, because from the time I left my house until the time I got to Kathmandu, it was me time. And I hadn't had that in like 17 years, from being a
Wow.
parent. And I needed that. And it allowed me to decompress. It allowed me to regain some clarity that I think I had lost. But what the trek did, is it taught me a very, very specific life lesson that I like to bring back to workshops that I facilitate. It has an impact on really everything I do. Is a little bit about the trip too. So, we fly into Lukla, which is the world's most dangerous airport, and definitely for a reason. But it was one of the most exhilarating things I had ever done. And you just see the enormity of the mountains around you. And we landed, we got out, and we immediately started trekking. And on day 2 of the trek, it was myself and my guide, our Sherpa, had gone ahead. He turned to me and he said, Rebecca, he's like, if you think you're going slow, go slower. For him, he was talking about my pace, because my assertiveness level is a little bit high. I'm a go-getter. I'm a hard charger. I move fast. But that pace that I was keeping, I was really proud of it, because I'm like, hey, we're going fast. We're moving up in elevation. And he's like, you're one of like the top 10 people I've ever had on this trek for, for durability and getting things going. But you got to slow down. And so it
Mm.
was so much more than just my pace. It was everything about my life at that moment.
Huge.
And I have
Wow.
carried that statement with me for the past year and a half, ever since I got back, that if you think you're going slow, go slower.
Mm.
Because there was so much I know that I was missing.
Mm.
And I was skimming the surface on a lot of things. And just how I showed up, I wasn't fully present. I was physically present, but I wasn't always mentally present. And that's a huge lesson that I love to share that, especially in leadership classes that I facilitate, because so many times we're moving at warp speed because we're trying to meet these deliverables, these deadlines, these expectations. We're trying to meet and achieve these metrics that are set in front of us. But so much of what we do at times, I think we lose a little self-awareness. We
Mm-hmm.
lose a little bit of ourself along the way. And until we actually stop and pause and slow down, that allows us to be able to move at a better pace, because we've been able to come back to what I call equilibrium in order to rebuild and then be able to move on again. But that part of my trip, I mean, getting to Basecamp was phenomenal. Seeing Gokyo Lakes was
Wow.
phenomenal. Kalapathar, having the 8 tallest mountains around you on what felt like a desert up at 17 plus thousand feet, was incredible. And I felt insignificant too,
Mm.
that whole journey. And that's one of the things that I also take away too is, I've built up importance, of myself and how I show up. But in the grand scheme of things, we are pretty insignificant. We have significance, but when we look at the billions of people that inhabit this planet, we are really insignificant in the grand scheme of things. And it starts to shift and change perspective that
Mm.
I can do the things I want to do. I can be a good parent, a good mother, a good spouse, a good coworker, but it requires me to slow down and it requires me to truly understand my place in this world.
Hmm. I love this. I love hearing about this experience, this trek, this adventure. And I love it so much. Every time I'm like, oh man, how can I slow down? Oh, I love this. When you look at let's talk about your work now and the demographic that you serve and exactly what you do. And when you are in when you're in your element, right? When you're coaching, facilitating, speaking, tell us about how there may be some resistance to the things that you just said, maybe just a little, right? People are like, I can't slow down. I've got this and that and all of these different things. So what do you say, right? When people have so much resistance around slowing down, and awareness is something that is like our favorite thing to talk about, you and I. We always talk about awareness and how we can bring that into the forefront in everything that we do, but weave that in for us, the awareness piece and what you do when
Mhm.
there's resistance.
Yeah, good, really good question. It happens. One of my beliefs is that with any contract, any work that I go into, I'm a firm believer that it all starts with self-awareness. That before we can really be aware of people around us and how they're thinking, how they're showing up, we have to understand ourselves and our own dynamics, our own tendencies and preferences. And so I use a very specific tool when I'm going in for engagements that helps people, understand here's how I process information, here's how I prefer to show up to the world around me. It doesn't mean I can't flex. It just simply means that this is the place that energizes me. If I'm, let's say, what we call first, third expressive, it means I'm energized by solitude. I'm energized by really contemplating and thinking things through versus somebody who is what we'll call third expressive. They're very energized by, I got to get all of these thoughts out so I can make sense of them. And when we start understanding that we build misperceptions about people, that starts to change how we show up to others. And when you talk about that resistance, Annie, there is a resistance to moving slow. But the question I like to infuse in there is if we keep up this pace, what is the long-term cost?
Mm-hmm.
If we keep this up, is it sustainable over the long term? And generally the answer is no. And I'm never telling people just to come to a grinding halt. But if you're able to build in some pause points, throughout your day,
Mm.
if you're able to stop and say, how did I just show up in that conversation? Did I show up the best that I could? Or would I do something different next time? Those micro pauses throughout the day are so important because when we're moving at that warp speed, that is the one thing that we generally don't do is we generally don't pause and become introspective. We just keep on going instead of saying, what could I have done different? What was my role
Micro
in this?
pauses. Yes,
Micro
I love
pauses.
that. I love
Absolutely.
that so much.
Yep.
You used some terminology. Talk with us about Emergenetics. And you are one of 33 Emergenetics Master Trainers in the world, one of 33. I mean, that's a really big deal. Tell us how you came to use this tool and, what you feel, what it does for people and how you use it in your work.
Yeah, thank you. So wow, I get a lot of enjoyment talking about this because I'm just such a firm believer in, again, understanding who we are. And there are so many tools that are on the market, Annie, and they all really do that. They give us a glimpse into who we are so we can show up better. But I got exposed to Emergenetics, I want to say in the 2009 range, somewhere around in there. The company that I currently work at had brought it in as a opportunity to see how it resonated. We were using a different tool at the time, and it stuck. And what was so beautiful about the tool is it's so very easy to see and read, and it gives everybody kind of that instant information that they need in order to say, how can I show up to this person better? How do I understand what's probably going through their mind? And if I engage in conversation or conflict or give feedback to this person, how can I have an understanding of how they will most likely show up? And that's what I found so powerful about this tool is it gave us instant insight. Instead of having to learn how to have an interaction with every person every time we got to know them, we could take a quick glance and say, I know enough to be able to be that much more effective in this conversation. And it was a very interesting journey because in 2011, I took my very first profile, and I had gone through a lot of life events at that point and got my profile back, and I looked at it and I'm like, I understand it. But it felt a little bit off. There was something there that just, I couldn't put my finger on it at that point. What became really powerful and eye-opening was in 2014, I was invited to become a certified associate with Emergenetics, and I took my profile again. And my facilitator was Gail Browning, who was the founder of Emergenetics. And she gave me my profile, actually handed it over to me. And I remember actually crying, embarrassingly enough, crying, because as I was reading the profile, I'm like, this is me. And this explains what is going on in my brain, because I could never fully articulate why one day I needed complete order. I was cautious of stepping into new ideas. I liked my step by step. I loved my checklists. But the next day, I'm just like, what the heck? We'll do whatever. And it was just like, well, let's go do this. How are we going to do it? I don't know, but we're just going to do it. And it made such an impression on me that I'm like, this is where I'm meant to be. I'm absolutely meant to be. And what I learned at that moment too, Annie, was generally when we take, this particular profile, it's stable over time. I can take it, let's say in 2014, and Annie, I've never taken it again because it is representative of me. But what I learned is that in 2011, I was going through some pretty substantial life events. And so how I was showing up at that time, I was showing up in a way that allowed me to get through that time. So our profile can be temporarily shifted, but then we're generally going to go back to what our profile naturally is. And so, over the years, I used this. I built up a large group of facilitators that work with me. And now that I am kind of going out on my own as well, with a small business, this is really the foundation of how I engage clients, because I just so firmly believe that for us to be high functioning, successful, empathetic, aware of the cognitive and behavioral diversity that exists, we have to have something that gives us some insight. And that's what I firmly believe this tool does. And so I will use this as my way to help bring people together to understand not only ourselves, but also the team and people around us to be able to then move forward to building a much more effective team.
Brilliant. You talked about life events,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think I've ever heard you link Emergenetics to life events in the way that you just have. And I find it's fascinating because, when you're in it, right, when you're in these challenges or, valleys, really, sometimes, I love that you're talking about having this tool to fall back on, to kind of remind ourselves that this is a moment, right? We're not going to stay in this valley forever. And you
Mm-hmm.
have this tangible to really hold on to. So, if somebody's listening and they're a leader, they're a
Mm-hmm.
CEO, they are a stay-at-home mom, right? I think it applies across the board. When you're in these valleys, what can you offer as something that they can see light? They could see that this is just a moment. Um, what would you say to them?
Be patient. Just to me, that's the biggest thing is again, it goes back to the saying that my guide gave me: if you think you're going slow, go slower. Because sometimes we have this need and this desire to just want to push through things and not
Mm,
feel what's happening with us as well. And just know that, be patient, and this is going to pass. It's probably going to be uncomfortable in the
mm-hmm,
moment, but sometimes in those spaces of discomfort, that's where we learn the most about ourselves. That's when we learn how we want to show up, what we want to do different, what's working and what's not working. But sometimes just exercising that patience and knowing that we will get through this. We don't know what it's going to look like on the other side,
mm.
but we will get through this. Things will turn.
They always do, right? Tell us about the specific groups. Like who would be somebody that would seek out your work?
Mhm. Yeah, good question. Thank you. So there's a lot of opportunity for people. So whether you've got a CEO or a business leader who is looking to gain additional insight into themselves and how they show up, or maybe they've received 360 feedback that says, here are some things that you could do different, to be able to maybe elevate your presence or do things differently. Those are people, I do one-on-one coaching as well. Leaders and their teams, I think this is a very, very powerful tool, for a leader and their entire team to go through, because again, we oftentimes build up misperceptions about people because of something that we've seen or
Mm-hmm.
heard. And our brain is this crazy thing. Our brain is always trying to make connections. There's a model, if you've ever read the book, Crucial Accountability, or
Mm-mm.
Conversations by Crucial Learning. There's a model that says, we see and hear something that kind of generates an emotion, and that emotion is what we act upon. But the mistake in all of that is we oftentimes don't have the facts. So we're generating emotion based on what I've seen and heard, maybe without all of the facts. And our brain is trying to
Mm-hmm.
make connections on, how do I show up? What do I need to do? And that's what this tool does, is I can see, let's say, a team member who's always sitting over in the corner with their arms crossed and maybe looking down. And maybe the first assumption I make is, oh, that person's checked out. They're disinterested,
Mm-hmm.
care about this topic. But when I start looking at profiles and I can see the profile of that person, I may recognize that, oh my gosh, this person is just first, third flexible. They are internally processing everything. It's not a defense mechanism, but they're internally processing to make sense of what they're hearing. Versus if I've got somebody who, let's say, is in a meeting and you've got a team member who just, or a leader who kind of domineers the conversation and talks all the time, you could have people who are saying, my gosh, this person just loves to hear themselves talk. Don't they ever shut up? And again, they build a misperception about them. Then we dig into the profile and we may realize that this person is what we call third expressive, meaning they have to articulate to make sense of what's going on. And all of a sudden, we start to get to that space of balance. I know what this end of the spectrum needs. I know what this end of the spectrum needs. And it helps me not make rash judgments against people. And that's what I love so much about this tool. I can see one person who, let's say, is working towards a goal, and my gosh, they're moving it just at this pace that I just wish they would speed it up, but they still get the work done in the allotted time. Yet you've got this other person over here who, dust in the wind, is flying towards the deadline, lots of expendable energy. But again, we have the potential of making misperceptions about people, and this helps us really understand what's happening and how we can show up to be better humans, to meet that person where they are.
And it all ties in to, the values that you've articulated, and kindness, and slowing down, and awareness. Like the way that you've described it, and using the Emergenetics tool in your work just really blends it all together, the whole human experience. I love it. I love when you talk about it.
Yeah. Can I share one other thing with you too?
Oh, yeah, please.
The other thing that has become really fascinating with this tool is there is also what they call a youth report as well. Even kids, can get an understanding, especially our adolescents who they're going through so much already as it is, and just helping them understand, why do I think this way? Why do I show up this way? But I've used this on both of my daughters. My oldest daughter, she has preferences in 3 of the 4 thinking attributes. And so as I'm explaining something to her, how I explain to her is going to be different than how I show up to my youngest. But here's something that's really funny is, and I'm actually kind of embarrassed by it too, but again, I've had a lot of years of experience with this tool, and I swear I had my youngest daughter pegged. I swear I knew her profile. And this past summer, I finally got her to sit down and take it. And I'm sitting in my office. She's like, all right, Mom, I'm done. And so she headed off to go to a friend's house. I'm like, I cannot wait. I was really proud. I'm like, I'm going to validate my belief of my daughter. I pulled up her report and my jaw hit the floor. I am like, you have got to be kidding me. She must not have taken this profile correctly, because what I'm looking at versus what I thought, even as a master associate, what I thought were different. And I was seeing things in her, and I was telling myself a story and projecting to her. And what I realized is we started having tension in the way that was parenting and showing up to her. And it's all because I had built up in my mind that she had a particular preference when her preference was something very different. But then as I read the report, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this explains her to a T. Again, I was able to then shift how I show up to parent. But yeah, it was a fascinating case study in humility on my part.
Sure.
But also incredible awareness for both her and I.
What a beautiful tool for us to get to know our kids better. I was in a conference last week, and somebody was talking about projecting their own identity onto their children. And that, like, I got teary. I'm like, oh, wow, I know that I do that. And so many moms that I know are doing that. And what can we do, right? So this is a great tool of an action step that we could take to help our kids form and own their own identity and
So
adjust our parenting and our communication to match them and to help them
so
bring it out.
yeah. And it's not that we parent our children different. We don't
Mm,
have one set of rules for one, another set of rules for another, but we show up using the words and the language that they need us to, so it makes sense to them. And that's the really important part, is it has to make sense to
makes
them.
sense. It does. It
Yeah,
does. I love that. Thanks so much for sharing that.
you're welcome.
You're a coach yourself. You're a leader, facilitator, author, and expert in your field.
Mhm.
And you were also my client, and we did some really deep work.
We
We
did.
we did. We met at least 10 times. We did some deep work. Can you share about your experience with my coaching and how it's helped you personally and professionally?
Absolutely. I will be just perfectly honest. This was such an incredible experience for me, Annie, because I was in a place in my life where I didn't know. I knew there was this one path. I knew there was a potential other path, and trying to make sense of all of it and how it fit together. What I always go back to and attribute our coaching to was, it has helped me to not be afraid to say yes to those things that I want to go after. I've always been my dad used to call me worrywart. That was my nickname growing up, because I worried about everything. I was concerned about everything. And I believe that in ways that has held me back from doing some of the things that I've really wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
This latest venture of creating my own business and going out on my own, I knew about 2 years ago that I just needed to do it. I needed that additional outlet. I needed to get into that space, but I was so afraid to do so. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
was afraid of everything, just like a lot of people are. I was afraid of failure. I was afraid I didn't know how to. I was afraid I couldn't get. I mean, the list goes on and on. But the one beautiful thing that you helped me with, and again, there were a lot of them, but the one that really sticks out to me is helping me not be afraid to just say yes. What do you have to lose? And that is something that I hold really closely to my heart. That when somebody reaches out, my first response right now is yes, let's explore this. Yes, help me understand what you're going through, instead of I'm not quite sure.
Mm-hmm.
And again, letting that insecurity settle in. My first space right now is yes, let's talk. Yes,
I
let's
love it.
understand. And ever since
Oh,
I
thank you.
ever since I did that, Annie, it's created this expansiveness that
Mm-hmm.
was not there when you and I started talking. The other big thing that you really helped open up for me is go get it. If you got
Mm-hmm.
an idea, go get it. Go
Yeah.
after it. You don't have to have all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I don't know where this came from, but I have a long history of thinking I need to know everything by myself. But if I've
Mm-hmm.
never started a business, never written a book, if I had never done those things and never spoken to you, I probably would be still pretty stuck. But because I don't have to have all the answers and I simply have to say yes and to reach out to people, there's somebody out there who's done that. And that's also what helped me write my book, start my business, and just keep moving forward.
Thanks, Rebecca. I love that. It's just what a beautiful experience working with you, getting to know you, and learning so much from you. I would just the coaching experience, right, is just such a beautiful thing.
Yes,
I think that it kind of gets this almost like therapy, right? It's like, well, I'm a coach. Why would I need a coach? I mean,
right.
you need a coach because you're a coach.
So true. Yeah,
Thanks for sharing that.
we need a coach because we're human
Human.
and we're
Exactly.
human.
Exactly.
And there's so
Yeah.
many things, but it's, I think that's the beauty of it, Annie, in
Yeah.
all the conversations that you and I had and all that we continue to have. One of the beautiful things that you do too is you ask the question and you just give space and grace.
Mm.
And we generally know the answer. But again, it goes back to if you think you're going slow, go slower. Because we oftentimes don't slow enough to pause to hear that voice that we really do know that, okay, I need to go find somebody who knows. I
Mm-hmm.
need to go down this path. But if we don't slow down enough to listen to our own voice, it's really hard to find it.
I want to tie in this concept before we go that, you talked about saying yes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how that has become part of you, and slowing down is such
Yep.
a big part of you. Now, some people might say, well, I need to say no more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, talk with us a little bit about that, how you can do both, say yes and be in the moment and slow down.
Okay, so I'm going to try and get this quote right. And this is another quote that I picked up through some training I was going through. And it was one of those kind of punch in the gut moments that really ties to this.
Those are the best.
The quote was, if you say yes to something you should have said no to, you're saying no to something you should have said yes to.
Yeah.
Kind of along those lines. And that's where I am right now is I'm crystal clear right now in the direction that I want to go and what my long-term goal is. And so while I know I'm saying yes to a lot of things and I am consciously slowing down, for me, I'm saying yes to the right things that are going to get me to my end result. And I think that's that balance is I could be out there saying yes to everything. And right now, I am probably saying yes to more than I should and could. But again, I have to make that decision for myself. Is this going to help me get to where I want to be in the long run? And for me, that's also slowing down because I've had to make a conscious choice in what I want my end goal to be.
Yeah, you just tied it together so beautifully. When that's the magic, right? That the middle part is the magic. And using the Emergenetics tool to reveal truth and identity and wholeness, that's where it all comes in. So you can kind of recognize, I love that quote. When you're saying no to something you should have said yes to, sometimes people, they just don't know. They're like,
Right.
well, I'm feeling it, I'm going with my gut, but then I'm second guessing, like, kind of thing. That's one thing that a lot of people struggle with. So I love that you bring in this tool, that you have this tangible that kind of makes sense to the abstract. I love how you tied it all in there.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Wow. I love our conversations. How can people find you? How can they reach out to you? Where can people see and get more of you?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a beautiful way of putting it. So I do have a website. So it is my name, RebeccaBabayan.com. That lists out kind of my services, what I do, types of facilitation, a little bit more about me. You can also follow me on Instagram. So it's Rebecca_Babayan_LLC. And that also highlights, some of the things about the work that I do. And I'm also on LinkedIn as well. So any of those three ways are the three easiest ways to get in touch with me.
Beautiful. And I'll put all of the links right there in our notes. Thanks for chatting with me, Rebecca. I can't wait to, have dinner again and chat with you again in person. Now, as we wrap up, one final question that I want to know. If you could go anywhere on the planet, this weekend, here's your ticket. Where would you go and why?
Machu Picchu. So that is my next solo trek that I'm getting out. I was hoping it was going to happen in October, but I don't think it's going to. Just lots of things going on right now. But another one of those just incredible places that I have always wanted to see, and I will get there.
Me too, girl. Me too. So incredible. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Annie. It was an absolute pleasure, and I am humbled by this. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this incredibly insightful and valuable episode from my dear friend and former client, Rebecca Babayan. So after we recorded this episode, she sent me a video, and it was of her opening the conversation cards that she had made. So those are going to be available soon. So make sure to pop on over to her website, RebeccaBabayan.com, find her on LinkedIn, connect with her there, and also on Instagram. Thanks for listening to the Lions Garden podcast. Reach out to me on Instagram. I can't wait to hear from you. You could also see my coaching offerings on my website at thelionsgarden.com.